Good evening, I'm Jay Carpenter, founder of Desert Blockchain, and this is our monthly session, the fourth Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Welcome. Tonight we're going to be talking about a device we call a Canary. And a Canary is part of a mesh networking scheme. I'm going to mute everybody unless you would like to talk. So if you're not familiar with a mesh network, and we were talking about it there, we were just talking about it, a lot of people are exploring how do you do a mesh network. And I'll talk a little bit about what the advantages are of a mesh network during our presentation. I'll show you how we're setting up a mesh network and why this might be of interest to you. So before I get started though, are there any questions? Anybody any particular topics anyone would like to bring up tonight before I jump into the presentation? All right, feel free to interrupt me as we go through this. So let's let this load up. So the topic is, what is a Canary? Decentralized mesh networking. And this particular image is showing that a mesh network consists of independent but communicating peers across some sort of geographic space. So it means that there's no central server. And that becomes very important in the scheme of things, because for the most part, we've relied upon central servers to do our communications, to do our data transfer, to basically do all of our connectivity. So this is a new and not totally new, but it's a powerful way to have people connect. This is an image of the current iteration of a Canary, and what you see in the picture here is a small device. It's about a 7-inch screen. You can kind of see how big it is that compared to this keyboard. And this is basically what we're talking about, what we're introducing, that has a lot of power, a lot of different dimensions in terms of uses and use cases. So the intention of tonight's session is to raise the awareness of why is a mesh network attractive, interesting, and valuable in the particular time that we're living in. And why might you want to start to explore a mesh network? And we'll go into some of those dimensions. We'll talk a little bit about centralized constructs versus decentralized constructs. We'll talk about some new decentralized tools that we're leveraging in this platform. And then we'll talk about some opportunities, how you can get involved and so forth, and some conclusions. So if you haven't seen this video, and this has been out for a while, about a little over 2 years now, and it's taken a little time to pull the pieces together, but this is a video that goes over some of the key points of what's a Canary, what's the idea, how can this device pull together or create a community among Desert Blockchain participants, citizens in fact, that can bring us together, give us something to experiment with in the decentralized web. And you'll notice I haven't used the term blockchain yet, but blockchain is like one of the components that we can utilize here. So one of the main use cases is using this Canary, hooking up some video cameras to it and creating a way for you to have a home security system where you can monitor basically people at your front door, um, pets, whatever. Now, this is the reason the Canary platform might be of interest to you is that it is decentralized. There is no centralized server that you're using like other security networks, whereby you're relying upon that centralized service to protect your video, protect your data, and basically protect your security, your cyber security, so that this can't be hacked. There's some other dimensions to this as well, which is that we might actually be able to, not initially, but later on, the platform that we're going to be showing you does not necessarily even need an internet presence. So you can actually do this connectivity using things like Bluetooth and other protocols for connecting not only your Canary, but also the video cameras and so forth. And one of the video cameras we're planning to use is this device called the UCam. And this is brand new. I expect to be getting a couple of these in shortly. And this particular UCam is very powerful, and it utilizes the interplanetary file system for the storage of the video recordings. It's also planned to utilize Filecoin, which we've talked about in the Desert Blockchain sessions. And basically these are about a little bit over $50, $52 a piece. And they enhance the design of what we're out to accomplish, which is a decentralized method of streaming video and audio and other media in basically all over the world using this particular platform that we're creating, the Canary. And I'll show you an actual Canary here in a moment. But this is something that just came out, and these are all on the presentation, by the way, which will be released. But this is really cool. This is called a BrainCraft hat for a Raspberry Pi. It's $40. Unfortunately, they're all sold out. And this little device is sitting on top of a Raspberry Pi 4, and you can see somebody's moving a coffee cup in front of the camera on this device, and it's doing machine learning with TensorFlow, I believe it is, and it's actually detecting that it's a cup that it's seeing through the camera. So basically, for the price of a Raspberry Pi, which is about $35, $50, let's say $50, plus this hat for $40, you can have a device that's not connected to any cloud device, anything else. It's totally sitting within your home or office. And this small set of hardware can start to intelligently detect objects, as well as facial recognition. It can also serve to operate via voice commands. It can operate like a Google Home device or an Alexa, so that you can start to control devices within your home. But the difference is you do not have anyone else listening in on what's happening in your home or in your office. So this is really, really cool. And we're looking forward to adding this type of device to the Canaries so that there's a way to play around with machine learning on a Raspberry Pi. And by the way, this is, there are links to this so you can watch videos and so forth and see how this operates. So the other key component that is part of this platform, excuse me for a moment. is something that some of us have been working on, which is basically a global directory that is also designed to be decentralized. And this allows us to connect and talk with one another over this mesh network using human-friendly addresses that we create, that we control, and that we can also purchase through a marketplace and sell through a marketplace. And this is still very new, but this is actually an alternative to the domain name system. And again, the advantage of these particular addresses is that you don't have any kind of data tracking associated with these addresses. Now, they kind of operate like a CB radio channel, so it's not totally private at this point, but you don't have any kind of data tracking that's happening behind the scenes that you're not aware of. So that's an important piece. And we're having workshops on a weekly basis now called PHONEWORD workshops. Those happen at 9 a.m. on Thursday mornings, and you can join those via Meetup under Desert Blockchain. And we're doing short sessions where we show how to use this directory service, how you can set up your addresses, your public keys. It's cryptographically secure and opens up a whole host of opportunities that's not dependent upon the traditional internet domain name system. It can use the traditional internet domains name system. And in fact, it can also use the old public switch telephone network. It's completely backward compatible to that. But not, well, let's not say completely, but it does have that backward compatibility. So this is quite exciting, and again, it's also designed so that all of us control our communications via this directory. So let's talk a little bit about, well, before we get into centralization and decentralization, I'm going to stop screen sharing and I will show you. This is actually a Raspberry Pi if you've never seen one before. Again, this is about anywhere from $35 to $55. And it can have up to, let's say, 4 gig of RAM. So it's got a lot of capacity. It's got a lot of power. And this device is powering this device, which is a Canary. And unfortunately, you can't really see the screen. It washes out. But this is basically the size of the device. It has a touch screen. It also has a keyboard. And this becomes like your digital furnace for your home or office or wherever, where you can start to attach cameras, you can control your lighting, you can control your entertainment systems. You can use that Braincraft hat and start to talk to this just as you would like a Google Home or an Alexa, so forth. But the difference is that you could completely control the content that goes through this. And that's really, really important in my view.
Hey, Jay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Does that basically become a node?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that becomes a peer. And so let me show you, I'm going to screen share again, and I will show you how the messaging works on this. So this is actually a shot of 2 Raspberry Pis that have the platform running on a peer-to-peer basis. And you can see Jose, who's actually on the session, sent a message. I appreciate everybody's support. And I am going to respond to Jose here on one of these peers. And hopefully hopefully this will work. I'm getting my keyboards mixed up. Whoops. Okay. Didn't intend to put that in there. Thanks, Jose. Voila, you can see that message. Of course, you're always in the spotlight, Jose. But you can see that Jose and I are now communicating with one another on a peer-to-peer encrypted basis. And this could be happening anywhere in the world. You can see how rapid, how fast it is. Let me go over to this particular, I'm going to minimize something over here so I can see what I'm doing, hopefully. Bear with me. So I'll go to a totally different node and put in a message. And voila, you can see that message is now propagated. And again, this operates like a CB radio channel, except you can actually determine who is on that channel, how many other peers are connected. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick to show you how that works. Bear with me. Some old messages on here. Okay, so this actually shows the peer IDs, which are not very human friendly, but I know that this peer ID, I believe, is another person on our team. This is this peer ID is for the other peer that I was communicating with. But anyway, I know this is a little bit cryptic, but a little bit technical. But I can assure you that what you're seeing is a very powerful way to do peer-to-peer connections. So that are where there's not data tracking. Does anybody have any questions about that before I continue into the presentation? All right. Let's see, I'm looking on the, I don't see any questions in the YouTube stream. So back to the presentation. Okay, so in terms of centralization versus decentralization, basically we have relied upon, until this thing called blockchain came along in about 2009, we have relied upon pretty much centralized governance. And that's, represented by a king and queen, or, whatever sort of centralized governance you want to pick. But now we have this decentralized, cryptographically secure way to interact and create whole new constructs. And I like to think of it like, some sort of sports arena, like you see on the right there, that where all these people have like equal power to communicate, to connect, to interact. And one of the biggest missing pieces out of this decentralized realm is governance. So we really have an opportunity to create some new structures for governance. This is a paper by a professor at Wharton, who's both in the business realm as well as the legal studies realm. And this was just published, I think, on August the 28th. But it talks about how there's a necessary need to move from centralized data constructs to decentralized data constructs, where we start to control our own data and have say over that, also have cryptographically secure connections and so forth. And this talks a little bit about, is kind of a summary of this paper. And he talks about how there's a push or an incentive set for the centralized internet, social media, as well as the governmental entities to move from tracking to actually influencing the people that are using their networks. Excuse me, I won't go into that in detail. You can read it, but it's a very interesting piece, and I think it highlights why this decentralized mesh network that we start to control becomes very important. This is a documentary / movie that Netflix just released called The Social Dilemma. And while I believe it captures a lot of the essence of why this is a critical topic at this point, I would caution you that it does seem to be biased and it has a particular point of view and maybe an agenda. But I think it's well worth your time to watch this documentary and get a sense of what the power is, what the dynamics are around data tracking in whenever we're relying upon some sort of centralized service or so forth. Not to mention, what's going on in certain governments like China, where they're actually compiling a social score for their people, and they're starting to track all sorts of movements and so forth. So this is a section that I'm just going to kind of briefly go through, but I ask you to consider the difference between invention versus innovation. And a lot of times we collapse these two terms, but they're quite different. And invention means creating something new. Innovation has a connotation of taking inventions or new methods of doing things and putting them out into the ecosystem and seeing what works and what doesn't work. What do people really use out of new things that are introduced? And the power of innovation, I think, is something that we can experiment with using the Canary mesh network, using some of these constructs, the global directory and so forth. And, you might look at the things that are being presented here tonight and say, well, this looks rather early. And you're right, it is early. But it's rather than keeping it and trying to develop it to a point where, everything's perfect, in my view, it's better for us to put these pieces out into the community and start to experiment with this and see what works. So here's some fairly recent talks on how innovation works. This fellow, Matt Ridley, is actually a member of the House of Commons in the UK and has a rather impressive background. But one of the things I'll highlight in this innovation is, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but he highlights how important it is to have permissionless innovation. And by the same token, Mike Munger, who's a professor at Duke University, who's also been on Econ Talk, talks in great detail about why permissionless innovation is a key piece to really foster innovation. This is an incredibly, in my view, inspiring talk from a fellow named Josh Williams on online gaming and how they're experimenting and possibly innovating with blockchain to actually create almost like complete nations and sovereignties within the gaming ecosystem that is decentralized and isn't controlled by a central entity. And the other part about this particular talk is that it highlights how massive the gaming industry is on a worldwide basis. Gaming actually dwarfs the output of Hollywood by several multiples. And I was really surprised at that. But gaming, which utilizes value exchange within these games, is kind of an ideal realm to explore these decentralized constructs. And I think it's also an ideal realm to explore new approaches to decentralized governance. So here's some of the tools that we're utilizing within the Canary platform. We're utilizing cryptography. We're exploring new ways to communicate and connect with what I consider to be superior utilization of cybersecurity. We're using the interplanetary file system, and we're also using libp2p.io, which is created by the same group that created IPFS, but it's a separate project. We're using PubSub, we're using Raspberry Pi 4s, although this could run into the cloud as well. And we're also using a global directory that we're creating called, we call it PHONEWORD workshops. And we will be introducing market dynamics for some of the addresses in the global directory, which could be very attractive to the Desert Blockchain citizens, as well as other people, other groups that are being invited into this prototyping. And we're relying upon something called public keys as sort of our machine-friendly piece to this construct. And then I'd like to throw this out, and this is just kind of my assertion, but I consider cryptography to be the printing press of today. So much like the printing press was revolutionary when it was introduced because it could open up a kind of a form of decentralized communication on a limited basis, cryptography also opens up and has some of those same dynamics. And on the right, you see basically a public key, which can be published, and then that opens up some secure ways to connect with other people. And we're utilizing this particular construct. But one of the dimensions as to why this is critically important, in my view, is this book that was published, I believe, in 2018 by Bruce Schneier. And if you're not familiar with Bruce Schneier, he's considered to be one of the top cybersecurity experts in the world. But the topic of the book is "Click Here to Kill Everybody: Security and Survival in a Hyperconnected World." And here is part of the introduction. But as you read through this, Bruce Schneier talks about real live incidences that have occurred since 2015, and actually before that, where there are physical devices that are being controlled by breaches in this hyperconnectivity, this digital world that we're living in. And one of the dimensions that we can explore with this Canary project and the decentralized mesh network is to strengthen the cybersecurity that we're all becoming reliant upon. And I think this is a particularly important quote from Tom Wheeler, former chairman of the FCC, but he's saying, "We're facing 21st century issues, discussing them in 20th century terms and proposing 19th century solutions." And Bruce Schneier says he's right, and we need to do better, and our future depends on it. And I believe that is the case. So one more piece that sort of emphasizes these same points is a few years ago, there was a talk at the Cronkite School of Journalism by a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist by the name of Thomas E. Ricks. And I highly, highly recommend you watch this video. It's titled, "Why I Fear We Will Lose Our Next Big War." And he talks about how unprepared our military is for these the cyber threats that are out there today. So I'll leave it at that. So the opportunities are that the desert blockchain community, as well as we're inviting other communities, and I'm gonna go through these last couple of slides because I want to get off screen share. And the conclusion, well, I want to say this about the Canaries. You know, this is early in the going, and if you purchase one of these Canaries, which we don't quite have the pricing totally worked out yet, but it will be a few $100s basically. But if you want to participate in this experiment and be part of this innovation, you can purchase your equipment through Desert Blockchain, and you'll have a 60-day money-back guarantee so that you can basically turn it in, no questions asked. You don't have to purchase any of this equipment through Desert Blockchain. You could purchase it on the open market. If you are a Desert Blockchain citizen, and I'm going to stop the screen sharing here. There is additional material in the that follows in the back of this presentation. But basically, if you participate in this and you know, you utilize either equipment you purchase through Desert Blockchain that we, you know, set up for you and assist you with, or you go out and buy it on your own, as a Desert Blockchain citizen, we will be publishing updates on the software from time to time so that you can be sure you're getting the latest software. Excuse me. I'm going to go on mute for just a second. Sorry, that's a lot of talking. So I'd like it to open it up for questions. You know, what you see behind me is the space where we have our Desert Blockchain camps. And we do plan to open those back up, you know, once it becomes safe. And we will have the Canaries there operating. We'll have workshops there doing tutorials. And you'll also be able to, you know, if you have a problem with your Canary, bring it there. If you want to turn it back in, or if you want to buy more equipment, we'll have some on hand and so forth. So that's kind of the overall picture of the Canary project, the PHONEWORD Workshops Global Directory, and basically innovating in this decentralized realm. So I will be quiet and ask if there are questions that folks might have.
I have one. Besides the Canary being utilized to control items in your own house, what is the purpose of it being hooked to a mesh network? What kind of interaction will they be having with other Canaries?
Well, you could be doing video conferencing.
Okay.
So I think in the additional material that I have there, there's an article from the New York Times, and it's a recent article where a journalist from Hong Kong talks about the surveillance that's possible with centralized constructs like Zoom. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, which we're utilizing here, Zoom is actually, and I'm not saying this with any kind of, to cast any suspicions or anything else around Zoom, but Zoom is a creation of someone who's, I believe, was a Chinese nationalist. And again, I have no reason to, you know, we're using Zoom, obviously, but whether it's Zoom, whether it's, Google Meet, whether it's whatever video conferencing platform we're using right now, if it's going through a central server, there's a possibility that it could, be compromised. And the other part that I think we have to keep in mind when we're using these social media constructs, like I post every day on Facebook. I've got pictures there. I've got all this, basically like almost a journal of my life on Facebook. What happens if Facebook, 5-10 years is no longer there? Or if Facebook is sold and is all of a sudden under the management of some new enterprise, what happens then? Same with Google, same with, you name it, Zoom, whatever. Zoom is a private company. So we will always need, in my view, centralized constructs like we've always used. The opportunity we have with this peer-to-peer mesh network, Willie, is to experiment with some new ways where we control our data. We have a higher degree of control of our data. Does that make sense? You're on mute, Willie, by the way.
Yeah, there'll be some way of calling a particular canary.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's what the global directory does, is it provides something akin to a phone book, so that you can connect. And we didn't get into that. But the other part that I didn't show when Jose and I were doing the messaging back and forth is we're actually storing that communication on each of our devices individually. And we will be working on a way to, let's say at the end of the day, sort of reconcile all the messages that went back and forth and see, do we have a total list of all the messages that people were attempting to send? And I think that becomes very valuable as well, because, right now, when you send a message out on a tweet or Facebook or whatever, you're relying upon those centralized services to be the steward of your messaging. And, we saw a breach with Twitter just within this year. So we don't know, but the answer to your question is yes. Part of what we're building is a directory so that you can connect with some degree of assurance that you're talking with the people you think you want to be talking with. And we don't have the video conferencing in place just yet, but technically that is feasible. So does that answer your question, Willie? Now, the other part that we haven't even talked about is possibly exchanging cryptocurrency via these platforms. So, it is feasible to, in that messaging that I showed you, simply message to somebody else your Ethereum wallet address or your Bitcoin wallet address or whatever wallet address. And the advantage of using this method is that you should have a higher degree of assurance when you send that message via these hub-sub peer-to-peer connections that you're actually getting the address of whoever you think you're getting it from. So in other words, if I wanted to send Bitcoin to Jose, I want to make sure that it's Jose that's sending me that Bitcoin address. Because if somebody gets in the middle and puts their own address, then I'm going to be sending cryptocurrency to somebody that I didn't intend to receive it. And the nice thing about having the telephone backward compatibility is that, you know, you can text somebody, you can connect with them via this peer-to-peer method, but then you've got a backup channel where you can text them or call them just to, you know, have almost like a two-factor authentication if it's critical that you're communicating with people that involves money or whatever it is, sensitive data. Does that make sense? So hopefully this gives you kind of a taste of some of the dimensions of what we're experimenting with here. And, you know, I think that it probably wasn't really clear what this was all about, what's a canary. And hopefully this session will start to lay some groundwork on some of the areas that we can explore and why this is important.
So, hey, Jay, it seems like wouldn't law enforcement be very worried about this? That, you know, criminals, terrorists, other people would use this system to communicate off, you know, off the system that they would want to get access to?
Yep.
Chance they're going to try and shut this down or restrict it in any way, or?
I think he's asking if the NSA is going to be concerned that they're not listening.
We love the NSA, right?
Sure.
Well, I mean, so, you know, Gary's a professor at ASU Law School and leads the innovation initiative there. You know, this is part of the governance, Gary. One of the things there is to explore is how do we create something that delivers some way for the people that we want to protect us to protect us. And I think there are some ways to do that. And I think it's a key part of scaling this sort of high technology, decentralized realm into the mainstream. And this is one of the reasons why governance is so critical. And I think the way to approach this so that there's some sort of, you know, check and balance with the people that we pay to protect us, to be able to protect us through this decentralized realm, is to have a new way to do something called social recovery. And social recovery is when we set up people that we trust that are close to us to basically operate on our behalf if something happens to us. So we might, you know, as this progresses, we might have a way to do social recovery. But I think that social recovery could be a path that's a workable balance between law enforcement and these decentralized, cryptographically secure methods of communicating, if that makes sense.
If I may intercede, this is what I call the knife paradigm. Because if you give a knife to a cook, you have a meal. If you give a knife to a surgeon, you have a life being saved, I'm sorry. If you give a knife to an assassin, you know what happens.
Trouble.
So are you going to prohibit the use of knives, or are you going to govern them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we don't have that totally worked out. And that's a great analogy, Jose. But the part that I showed about the comparison to the printing press and cryptography, that is, the barn doors are open there. And, you know, there's a bunch of, let's say, collisions that are happening right now between the legacy ways that we've done things and how those legacy ways are starting to collide with these decentralized realms. And sort of the backbone of these decentralized realms is cryptography. And the viability of reversing or stopping or even slowing down the progress on cryptography, I think is, you know, that's a futile effort, in my view. And by the way, when we're talking about, when I showed you that public key, to the best of my knowledge, and if somebody's aware of something that I don't know, at this point in time on September 23rd, 2020, the cryptography that is behind that public key can stand up to a state actor. So in other words, that cryptography is not defeatable by the most powerful nations on the planet. And when there is a fault in that cryptography, that's a big news item. And you know, we've got bigger problems than Jose and I messaging each other on a peer-to-peer network. So, if that makes sense. So, does that answer your question, Gary?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, what's that?
A work in progress.
A work in progress. And, you know, I think it's important, again, for this to move forward, that we do involve the law enforcement agencies, we do involve the policymakers, and, you know, the notion that this is going to be some sort of, you know, maverick construct that is going to allow us to just, you know, live outside of the policy and the governance constructs that we've created, you know, for eons, is that's an unrealistic, you know, thought. So at the same time, I will say that the things that we just are looking at tonight do serve as an alternative and kind of a check and balance to the centralized constructs. So there's this whole dance that's going on between this new decentralized realm and the traditional centralized realm. Does that make sense? All right, well, I've done a lot of talking, and you know, we've got about 12 more minutes, but we don't have to stay on. I don't see any questions in the chat for the YouTube. I appreciate everybody's time and looking at this, and you know, I'm excited. I think there's some incredibly powerful dimensions for us to explore, not only in Arizona, but basically with other communities around the globe. So, all right. Well,
Thanks, Jay.
thank you, Gary. Thanks everybody for attending, and we will have our next monthly session on Wednesday, October the 28th at 7 p.m., maybe earlier if camp is back open. And there is a a PhoneWord workshops session every Thursday now at 9 a.m. So thanks for your time and attention. If you got any comments or topics you'd like to cover in the future, please let me know and we'll be happy to explore those. Have a good evening.
Thank you.